Hey everybody, this is Neil back with another ASL video. Uh, this time, this one's a little unorthodox, but I'm calling it a tactical tip because wasn't sure where else to put it in my video series. And what I'm going to talk about today is what's called METT-TC or MET, and that is applying military doctrine to ASL. And in a formal life in a galaxy far, far away, I was in the military for a short period of time before I started college in my engineering degree. I was in 11 Bravo, 11 Bang Bang, which is infantry, and I did all my training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina when I was 17 years old. I joined the military during my junior year of high school, and the summer between my junior and senior year, I was shipped off to Fort Jackson, South Carolina to do my basic training. That was fun. And then after I graduated, I think maybe a week after I graduated from high school, I shipped off to Fort Benning, Georgia, right next to the airborne school to do my advanced infantry training. And I did other training stints at Fort Benning after that, again, right next to the airborne school. I didn't go through airborne school, which would have been cool. I did complete half of drill sergeant school during that time, and then an opportunity came for me to attend university, and I chose to do that instead of staying in the military full time. Uh, but during that time, we had this training, this MET-TC. At the time, I don't think it was called that. It probably was something by another name because I don't think it really started being called this term until somewhere in the 1980s. And I did all my training in the first part of the 80s, all my military training. Okay, let's step through this and hopefully some people find this useful. A lot of people are probably already utilizing this, though they don't know it, and they don't know it actually has a name and a purpose. New players hopefully can use this to improve their ASL game. So this that I'm showing here is the troop leading procedure. This is just an outline. And this is from the Field Manual 7.7-8 Infantry Rifle Platoon and Squad. And you can see the procedure is quite lengthy. To do all this training is multi-day and then many follow-up days of reinforcement, probably every year for leaders in the military that are leading infantry. But the part we're going to focus on here is this boxed area here, the MET-TC analysis, which is what you do to come up with a plan once you've been given a mission. In our case, when you've been given a scenario with victory conditions and an order of battle for each side. What do you have to do before you actually start to have a plan? And I'm going to show you how you can apply this to advanced squad leader. So let's go to the next slide and go over what MET-TC stands for. Now, the origin, like I said, is a little foggy, but it's believed that it originated in the 80s, which is when I did my training. I don't remember it being called this back then, but it essentially stands for, it's an acronym. It stands for mission, enemy, terrain, troops, time, and civilian considerations. I have civilian considerations crossed out here because in ASL, interestingly enough, civilians almost never come into play. I don't recall ever playing a scenario where civilian considerations were ever taken into play. In other words, you have to worry about uh, calling in OBA on top of civilians and buildings that might happen to be there. It's just not a thing in ASL. So we're not going to cover that at all and how to use that in ASL. It'd be interesting to play a scenario where civilians are a critical part of the game, and I've actually had some ideas to design a scenario around that, but I haven't put anything on paper. It's still up in the noodle up here, maybe someday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through each of these five, M, E, T, T, and T, and show you how you can apply them to your ASL game and hopefully give you some examples from actual ASL play or scenario cards or victory conditions or special rules to show you how you can apply this military doctrine, which is used by the U.S. Army, the U.S. Marine Corps, probably most NATO nations, most Western nations probably use this sort of method to come up with plans on the battlefield when you're leading infantry. So the first thing we're going to jump into is M for mission. So this paragraph from MF7-8 is basically a paraphrase of what's contained there, and it reads, the leader considers his mission and derives the essential tasks his unit must perform in order to accomplish the mission. And as you can all guess, in ASL terms, what does that mean? Well, that means your victory conditions. What do you need to secure victory in said scenario? And you can boil that down to a whole, probably a laundry list of bullets on how you should interpret victory conditions, but I've boiled it down, I think, to 5 important ones, and one that extends outside victory conditions. So understand the victory conditions from all angles. So sometimes victory conditions have multiple parts to it. Make sure you understand every part of the victory conditions listed in the paragraph or sentence. Victory conditions often have multiple components, which I just mentioned. Understand how victory condition components might complement or contradict one another. There have been situations where you can get contradictory victory conditions. Then prioritize these victory condition components to form your plan of attack or defense, depending on which side you're on. And then the last bullet here is not really related to victory conditions. It's more the scenario as a whole. Understand the SSRs at the bottom and how they impact the mission or the scenario. Some of the SSRs are incredibly important and can have a huge, deep impact on the scenario you play, depending on which side you're on. I remember when myself, one instance I remember, when myself, Scott, and Stu played a three-player scenario. I don't know, a couple years ago. It's been a couple years already. Aiding the local constabulary, I think it was, and I was playing I can't remember which side I was playing. It wasn't the South Africans or maybe it was the Italian. I don't know. I can't remember which side I was playing. Anyway, my side had Molotov cocktail capability, and I completely forgot that I had Molotov cocktails. It was in the SSRs, and I completely spaced it off. Didn't use one Molotov cocktail the entire scenario, and they could have come in useful in a few situations. So make sure you understand all the aspects of the victory conditions and the special scenario rules of the mission or the scenario. And I'm going to show you an example here from Retaking Veerville. Very classic scenario, very pretty simple scenario, and the victory conditions are as reads. The Americans win at game end if there are no good order German units in buildings N5, N6, M4, and L3, which are shown here. Sorry, here. Get my pointer on the right screen on the important part of the map sheet, playing area. Uh, Now, so the Americans win, meaning obviously the Americans have to seize these buildings at game end, not right when they seize them. Sometimes a game can end when a victory condition is met immediately. In this situation, it's at game end, meaning if the Americans actually seize a building or are able to take a building and boot the Germans out of it or have no good order Germans in it, the Germans may still have an opportunity to seize those buildings back. So make sure you understand that in this situation, you can play the scenario to the very end in most cases. Some scenarios will end instantly if a victor condition is met. If there are no good order German units in those buildings. Now, it doesn't say the Americans have to stay in the building. Uh, all it says is there have to be no good order German units in the buildings. There can actually be Germans in the building. They just cannot be good order. And once you boot them out or cause a German unit to be not good order, the Americans can leave the building. It doesn't say they have to control the building. It just says there can't be any good order German units in the building. So they could be, uh, if an American unit and a German unit are locked in melee, that German unit is not good order anymore. If the German unit is broken, obviously it's not good order anymore, and most likely it would probably have to route out if there's Americans nearby anyway. So let's go to, I'm going to pop up Vassal of showing this exact situation of a scenario ending we had, or close to an ending we had a while ago when we played this. See if I can find it and pop it up here. Yeah. So here we have the Americans going to go last, I believe, in retaking Veerville, and this was the last turn. So the Germans would not have an opportunity to take any of these buildings back. So the Americans have essentially secured these two buildings, N5 and N6. No matter what happens to the Americans, there's no way for the Germans to get back in and occupy them. So even if these German units fired on all these units and for some reason they all broke and had to route away, there are at the end there would be no good order Germans in those buildings, so the Americans would have achieved that victory condition for those two buildings. Now up here is the more interesting part. So it's the Americans' turn and it is the last turn. Um, what happens is here is either the American units have to break these German units and force them to route away. Um, they're going to have to survive any defensive fire. Obviously, they'll prep fire because they can't move in yet. They'll have to advance in. So they'll prep fire. Maybe they'll break these guys and they'll be forced to route away. Probably satisfying victory conditions. If they don't break, then the Americans are going to have to advance in. And if the Americans have to win. So the Americans all they have to do is be in close combat, and that causes the German units to not be in good order. Thus, they would meet the victory. The Americans would meet the victory conditions. So if we were in this situation, and it was at the end of the game, and the Germans did not eliminate the Americans in close combat, and there was melee in these two hexes, Germans are no longer good order. There's no good order units in any of the victory condition buildings, German units. The Americans would win. Now, if we're back like this, and the Germans essentially break during defensive fire, break these guys, and they're forced to rout away, then the Americans are going to have to do something interesting with these guys. They've captured these buildings already. They're safe. The Germans can't get in them because it's the last turn. These guys are going to have to make a run across the street somehow, right? And obviously, they're going to take fire from all these German units, and it's probably going to be pretty ugly. So this scenario, winning at the end here, winning for the Americans is hinges on them either breaking these units, forcing them to rout out during prep fire, and then getting in there, or the Germans surviving prep fire, American prep fire, defensive firing back, breaking the Americans and forcing them to rout back, or the Germans winning in close combat, um, thus eliminating the Americans, which would leave them in good order. So if they're locked in melee at the end, Germans are not in good order and the victory conditions would be met. So this is a very simple example of victory conditions. There are some scenarios that have very complicated victory conditions, but I thought I'd show a simple one here to show you how to interpret and comprehend all the victory conditions, even if they're simply worded, and what that means for you in your planning process. Okay. The next part of the MET process is enemy, and we'll go over that here in a GIF. All right, enemy. I know everybody does this when you play an ASL scenario because you really don't have any choice. If you ignore your enemy, you're going to lose. So the leader considers the type, size, organization, tactics, and equipment of the enemy he expects to encounter. He identifies their greatest threat to his mission and finds their greatest vulnerability. Uh, in ASL terms, this is simply your enemy order of battle. Um, that doesn't mean taking a cursory glance at it. That means go over your opponent's order of battle, every unit. Um, look at the leaders, look at the squads, understand the composition, disposition, strength, capabilities, and probable courses of action of those units. So attack their weaknesses and avoid their strengths. Look at their morale levels. Do they have smoke exponents? Do they have support weapons? What type of support weapons? What are their ranges and firepowers and breakdown numbers? That kind of thing. If vehicles are involved, read their Chapter H entries. I say this all the time in videos. Chapter H is critical, not only for evaluating your enemy, but evaluating your own units. Understand the capability of your vehicles, AFVs, and theirs as well. You may be in for a surprise one way or the other, depending on what's on the battlefield. Okay, let's take a look at a scenario sheet for failure to communicate. So in this case, this is the French here. They've got some elite squads, first line squad, and a crew. And if you have a crew, you know you're going to have either support weapons or guns involved. They have a 10-2 leader, excellent leader, 8-1 and a 7-0, two machine guns, a mortar. So look at the chapter H notes. Does a French mortar, what can it fire? Is it just HE? Can it fire smoke? I can't remember in this case. Can it fire smoke? Can it fire white phosphorus? Probably most likely not. Can it fire illumination rounds if you're playing a night scenario? Don't know. Make sure you understand the capability of that mortar. The French side also has 10 concealment counters. That means if he sets up in his units in concealment terrain, he may be able to grow concealment on those units anyway, and then he'll have 10 dummies to work with. So there's a little bit of obfuscation, fog of war there with the 10 concealment counters. So think about where he might set them up after you've looked at the terrain. And then he's got 3 vehicles, 2 really light tanks here. This is an early war scenario. And an anti-tank gun, a very capable anti-tank gun for early war. 25 millimeter LL, rate of fire of 3, and it's less than 40 millimeters, so it has a possibility of getting multiple hits with a rate of fire of 3. That thing can fire all day long if the French player rolls good enough. In this case, Scott, we played the scenario, Scott was a French player. Now, if we go to this lower part here, there's a little bit of, throws a little wrench into your evaluation of the enemy forces. He has the ability to choose A, B, or C as part of his starting order of battle. So you can get another tank with basically a mobile 25 LL with only a rate of fire 1 though, and a armor leader, or you could get a crew and another anti-tank gun, or you could get a crew and an anti-tank rifle and 12 minefield factors. So you have to think as a German and as a French, how am I going to use these, which one I pick, and how it's going to be used against me. And that may affect how you do your setup, evaluating your terrain, right? Because if he picks a vehicle with a gun, that's going to change your setup. Possibly if he has a static anti-tank gun that's going to be hidden somewhere versus a concealed vehicle that's probably just going to move during the game. It's easier to set up for this. You could set that up anywhere and it's probably just going to move, right? But if he picks this anti-tank gun and he hides it somewhere, you have to think about, okay, where is he going to hide it? And as a German, how am I going to have my vehicles approach the enemy positions? If he picks minefield factors, then you have to think, how are my infantry going to, where's he going to put them? Where are my infantry going to move to approach? Or vehicles if he puts minefields on the road, or if he converts them to vehicular mines instead of infantry mines, which you can do. Okay, and the Germans the same thing. Um, elite smoke exponent 2. All the Germans have infantry have smoke exponents. Good leadership. Germans usually have very good leadership. Dismantled machine guns, heavy and medium at the start. So you have to think about your setup there. how fast you can move in, when you're going to mantle them and put them together so you can use them. Same with the dismantled mortar. Where are you going to put that thing? Mortars need line of sight. Are there hills? Is there a way to get up a hill? It's already heavy to carry at 3 portage points. Once you mantle it, it's almost immovable. So you got to figure out where you're going to move it when you set up or move it on board. And then a demo charge here. And then these 3 vehicles, read the vehicle notes. In the next part, I'll tell you why it's critical in this scenario, but the hint is smoke. Okay, so make sure you evaluate your enemy's order of battle and adjust your plan accordingly once you know the terrain, once you know the battlefield, and once you know the enemy composition. Now, playing ASL, we have the luxury of knowing, almost always knowing the enemy composition. We have the scenario sheet. It's right in front of us. We can look and we know exactly what the enemy has. Um, what we don't know is where they might set up and how your opponent might react when they play. But we know exactly what we're going up against. So make sure you take advantage of that by studying the scenario sheet and following the enemy part of the map process. Okay. Next up, we're going to do terrain. Yeah, we're going to do terrain. Then after that, we'll do troops, which is your troops, the ones that you're actually commanding. All right. Okay, the next part of the doctrine is naturally terrain. The leader considers the effects of terrain and weather on enemy and friendly forces using the guidelines below, called OCOKA, OCOKA, and they are observation and fields of fire, cover and concealment, obstacles, key terrain, avenues of approach, and weather. And I put weather in parentheses because it's not listed in the acronym. And these things could be considered in any order. They just holistically they have to be considered all together when you're coming up with your plan. But weather, even in ASL, if you play with weather rules, people should at least at a minimum, not in starter kit, obviously, but in full ASL, play with wind rules. We've gotten in the habit of making sure we always roll for wind at the beginning of each turn. But I put that in parentheses because it's not considered terrain, okay? But it is one of the aspects of the environment that can affect the game. And in ASL terms, that's basically your map setup and again your SSRs. So study and understand the map setup and the victory locations, um, and as well as understand all the terrain you'll encounter from chapters B, which is ETO, European Theater Terrain, chapter F, which is desert terrain if you play in the desert, and chapter G is PTO, Pacific Theater, if you play in that theater. Okay. Now let's go through this acronym of observation down through weather and see what those definitions look like. Okay, observation, and fields of fire. Understand lines of sight and for defense and approach. And I'm not talking about just about prep fire and defensive fire. I'm thinking along the lines even of observation for spotted fire, for mortars, off-board artillery spotters, or leaders manning radios that are calling in directly OBA. So understand lines of sight across the entire playing area from a fire point of view and an OBA point of view, as well as creating um, your own hindrances during play using smoke, which I'll show you here in a little bit. Cover and concealment. So cover, in the case of military doctrine and ASL, since it is a game and a simulation, cover is protection from fire. So we know what cover is. That's basically TEM, and to some extent, hindrances. Concealment is protection from observation. So it allows you to, in ASL and on the real battlefield, remain concealed. It adds a fog of war to the battlefield where enemy units don't exactly know the composition of the units that are approaching them and attacking them. So always take advantage of the best terrain effect modifier and hindrances, and never forget, and I do all the time, to grow concealment because it can help you out a lot. So at the end of your player turn, make sure those units that can grow concealment are placed under concealment counters because that helps a lot. Obstacles. So attackers leverage terrain that blocks line of sight. So when you're on the attack, on the offensive, and you're approaching your victory condition locations, if that's what the victory conditions are about, leverage terrain that blocks line of sight. Approach behind buildings, behind woods, down through gullies, so no one can see you unless they have a really high elevation advantage, or they're adjacent to the gully. So use the terrain to tailor the approach so you can't be seen until either you want to fire or you want to be seen for whatever reason. Okay. And defense, minimize how obstacles block your line of sight. So when you're on the defense, don't set up behind obstacles. Set up so you can create fire lanes um, that are either in front of the obstacles or that bypass and go around or through obstacles, forcing the opponent to either run across those fire lanes or come up through those fire lanes. Okay. Key terrain. So look for ways to bolster or seize strong points and or take advantage of route paths in ASL. Um, Route paths are critical. Having forethought of how you're going to set up your initial units, either on attack or on defense, giving your units a way to route to suitable terrain before they break. So such that if they break and they're in some random position, sometimes you don't have a choice where they route. They're kind of forced to route to a particular location, right? But if you put some forethought into how you use strong points on the terrain to set them up initially, you can actually force those units to route to the hexes you want them to if you set them up just right. Okay, so keep that in mind. Key terrain are things like tree lines, high ground, stone buildings, maybe seizing trenches or foxholes as you're moving forward, or pillboxes, that kind of thing. So look for ways to bolster strong points and take them during gameplay and setting up to take advantage of route paths to strong points in the rear. Avenues of approach is very similar to fields of fire. When you're approaching, you want to stay out of fields of fire. You want to approach behind obstacles unless you have to get some fire on the enemy. And if you're on defense, you want to set up to cover as many fields of avenues of approach with fields of fire as possible. Now, here's the last thing: weather. Weather is in Doctrine is defined as visibility, wind, precipitation, cloud cover, temperature, and humidity. And what that boils down to is visibility can be thought of as a hindrance. So if you're playing a scenario that is low visibility, like early dawn or dusk, or you're playing in mist conditions, you're going to have usually a hindrance, a diral modifier that's like a hindrance when you fire. Wind can affect things like smoke deployment, smoke drift, uh, fire, spreading of fire, kindling, all those things, which can come in critical. Smoke is probably more critical than fires because wind can really either screw up your smoke or help you out a lot. Precipitation affects environmental conditions, which can affect how things burn. It can also turn your battlefield into mud, which can screw up movement. Cloud cover really doesn't come into play in ASL. Temperature doesn't. Well, temperature and humidity do. That comes in the form of your environmental condition. What is it dry, very dry, moist, whatever, right? That comes into fires and setting fires. So never underestimate the effects of weather and wind and changing weather and wind during play and the environmental conditions because those can all have a huge impact on play. Let's take a look at this scenario. Failure to communicate. Scenario 233, early war, 1940, German versus French. And what I want to focus on here is uh, weather. There are some field of fire things you could look at here concerning the bridges. There are two stone bridges. There's a stream, shallow stream cutting, you know, the board basically in half, and the French are on the left and the Germans are on the right, and their armor is going to come in over here on the right somewhere. And most likely the armor, if they want to get in early and be effective, they're going to probably go across a bridge. If they go across the stream, it's going to slow them down, and they're going to risk bog check. So, you know, fire lanes for the French are going to be maybe with respect to the vehicles are going to be maybe covering these bridges. And I believe they have I think I have the scenario sheet here. I think they have an anti-tank gun. Yeah, they have a 25 LL, which against these light tanks is probably pretty effective with a rate of fire 3 and a chance for multiple hits. Let me pull that map back up. I think Scott set his anti-tank gun up here to cover this bridge, which was a pretty good place to set up. I thought he'd set it up somewhere in here, maybe in these brush on the fringes of the woods, because I did bring some tanks across this bridge, and he took some shots at them. Turned out I don't think they were very effective, but he did try to cover this avenue of approach. And then over here, um, he's got what else does he have? He's got two anti-tank guns. Yep. He must have picked, you can pick one of these three groups. He must have picked this one here. So I believe this is an anti-tank gun over here to cover this bridge approach. So he did a good job taking terrain, military doctrine into effect to cover the bridges, assuming I wouldn't want to drive my light tanks through the shallow stream and risk bog and slowing them down. The other thing he did is he put I believe his best leader and a medium machine gun, I think it was, up in this building to cover the approach into this village and across the bridge. And he had opportunities to also move it if he needed to. I can't recall what he had over here. Okay, but as far as avenues of approach, he did a pretty decent job. But what I really wanted to talk about here is the special scenario rule here. Uh, Mild breeze. So whenever you read the SSRs and you see weather uh, wording, that should trigger something in your head that the designers had some intent to that. And in this case, there's a mild breeze. Now, I played the Germans, and when a mild breeze comes up, that means they want to affect something in the scenario. And that means you as a player either need to be aware of it or take advantage of it. Okay. So I looked at my vehicles, my tanks, my light tanks here. I had three Panzer 38Ts, I think they are, and Panzer 2S, two of them. When I looked closer, I read the vehicle notes, like I said, like I said earlier. Make sure you read the vehicle notes. All five of these vehicles have smoke dischargers. And then a light bulb went off in my head. Mild breeze. Every vehicle has smoke dischargers. Drifting smoke. That must be when they play tested this as the Germans, they must have assumed that the German player should be using smoke dischargers and drifting smoke to provide cover for their approaching Germans, because there's not a whole lot of, once you get out of this village, this lower village area, there's not a whole lot of terrain, right? I gotta run out of a gully because I have to capture 5 multi-hex buildings, and I think they're all right in here. Okay. No, there's one up here too. And I have to run through grain, maybe through the open, coming out of gullies, maybe crossing a bridge. So they put that in there so that the Germans would have the capability to provide cover and hindrances. Sorry, not cover, more concealment. Well, cover, hindrance is sort of a form of cover for the approaching Germans to take these large stone buildings in this village, Belgium village here. And that's what I did playing as the Germans. Once my German AFVs got across the bridges, or at least this top bridge, all they did Every time they moved, I laid smoke somewhere strategically, either to cover fire for infantry or to cover my AFVs moving in. I think I brought a couple AFVs in low here and brought them right into the village here because he didn't have any anti-tank capability in this village really. He did have something here. I forget what it is, but I think I took it out pretty early. And I just laid smoke everywhere and it allowed my German units to move in really quickly. So make sure when you're thinking about terrain in ASL and avenues of approach and cover and concealment and things like that, don't forget about weather and special scenario rules, especially wind and smoke, because it can be a game changer in a lot of scenarios. Smoke, when you're on the attack, smoke is your best friend. If you have an opportunity or there's something that gives you a slight advantage to use smoke, do it. That's what I did here. I laid smoke everywhere, every time I could, every time my tank moved. Even if it didn't move, I'd do a smoke discharger roll and drop smoke somewhere. Then it would drift. And it would last for like, each one would last for like 2 turns. There was smoke everywhere on this map. So in the end, it ended up being a very close scenario, if I recall. I think it came down to this building here. Um, and I was just able to capture it. But if I wouldn't have done the smoke thing and using the wind to provide drift, the French would have won this scenario because it came out to be a close one in the end. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is troops, which is enemy troops, your enemy order of battle. We're not going to do enemy troops. We did that earlier. We're going to do troops, your troops, the ones that you command during the mission or the ASL scenario. Now, the paraphrasing of this is from Field Manual 7.8 is the leader considers the strength of subordinate units, the characteristics of his weapon systems, and the capabilities of attached elements as he assigns tasks to subordinate units. Now, the way you could interpret that in ASL is, how many squads do I have? How many leaders do I have? Because you can divide those up into subordinate units, platoon units. I did a video, maybe I'll link it up here in the upper right, where I say and go over why, even though it's called squad leader, at its core, organizationally, it's a platoon level game. It's essentially platoon leader. Your leaders essentially build platoons with each of your leaders. I think I show that here in another slide, and that's how you have subordinate units and elements of your order of battle. Now, in ASL terms, this is similar to the enemy bullet, except it's your side of it. It's your order of battle. So go over your order of battle. Same things apply. Understand your capability and nationality strengths and weaknesses, especially if you're playing something like the Japanese. The Japanese play completely, not completely, but very, very different than a traditional ASL unit. You have to adjust, and you have to adjust your gameplay for that. So make sure you understand the nationality capability of your units. The Finns also play quite a bit differently. Um, Germans are kind of the middle of the road. They're not bad at anything, but they're not excellent at anything. They have good equipment and good leaders. Americans break easy, rally hard, have good equipment. Japanese don't break, rally easy if they do break. Um, Russians, they just you have tons of units, right? It's kind of a Russian Zerg in World War II. So understand your nationality capabilities and use their strengths and weaknesses to your advantage. Take advantage of the differences between the enemy order of battle and your order of battle, whether that's morale levels, firing ranges of your support weapons, or squads, their inherent firing range, right? If you have a better firing range, try to stay out of their firing range, right? They'll be half firepower. You'll always be max firepower. You can fiddle with those ranges if you can. Firepower combinations for fire groups. If you use the infantry incremental infantry fire table, you don't care about that. You just throw whatever together and it doesn't really matter. But if you're using the traditional fire table, infantry fire table, group up units and support weapons so you're not wasting firepower. So you're not leaving firepower on the table when you're making fire groups or you have a small stack. Um, Utilize a platoon organization structure. This is depending on the scenario. Some nationalities have, you know, uh, one leader for 2 squads. Some have one leader for 4 squads. Typically, its average is probably about one leader for 3 squads, which is a platoon. And try to organize it that way. Per the video I linked earlier up in the right, have a plan for your reinforcements. Know when they're coming on, where they're coming on. Don't forget that they're coming on. I've done that before. You get to the next turn, it's like, oh crap, I forgot to bring on this extra platoon, or these 2 extra tanks, right? And by that time, you've gone too far, and you just have to work out a deal, hopefully with your opponent, and say, yeah, just bring them on now, bring them on late. But it can totally screw up your plan if you forget. Don't forget reinforcements. Again, if vehicles are involved, read their Chapter H entries. Understand the chance of any vehicle penetrating the armor of any enemy unit. Okay. Don't play the scenario and without having a fundamental understanding of I have this type of tank with this kind of gun. If I take a shot at this enemy tank, what are my chances of getting a armor penetration, a kill, right? I've seen people play, and I've even made the mistake of saying, "Oh, I'm going to take a shot," and then you do the math and you go, "Oh, well, I might hit it, but I've got like a 2% chance of getting a kill. Why would I ever take that shot?" So understand your vehicle matchups, your vehicles to their vehicles, and which should actually be taking shots at what. Don't waste your shot attempts. Don't waste your time taking shots that have no meaning. Okay. So yeah, understand your units and your enemy units, how they compare on all of the factors, and that'll help you formulate your plan. Okay. I'm not really going to show anything. No scenario card. I kind of went over it in the enemy. It's just the true part is analogous. It's your order of battle. Understand it. And I would argue you need to understand your side much better than their side because you can't manage their side. You can only manage your troops and what they can do. So make sure you understand your capability the best. So the last one is time, which is an interesting one. And I'll go over that here in a sec. And we're at the last bullet here, time. Last thing you should consider, I mean, you can consider these in any order, but MET is just METT-T is just an acronym to remember. Time is the last thing. So the leader refines his allocation of time based on the tentative plan and any changes to the situation. And this should be stated that the way you evaluate these 5 bullets, you do it before you start the scenario, before you get the mission, the scenario, and formulate a plan. It can be thrown out the window the first turn in. These are constantly evolving, and you have to be evaluating all of these things while you're playing, right? Uh, Mission, victory conditions, your enemy units, um, the terrain, your troops, and what you have left and what he has left, and time, how much time is left. So in ASL term, time in military doctrine is completely different, but I would look at it in ASL terms as turns and the size of the scenario. Time in military doctrine is more, you know, uh, we have to start this mission in 24 hours. Okay. Uh, how much time do we have to get supplies? How much time do we have to do planning with the squad leaders or platoon leaders, right? That's all done up when you play ASL. That's kind of what we're doing now. But time in the ASL to me is turns and the size of scenario. Okay, that means understand the size of the map, versus the victory conditions versus the terrain you have to navigate versus the number of turns you have to navigate the terrain. So one of the first things I do um, when we pick a scenario and I set up a map in Vassal is I look at where um, either say I'm attacking, I look at where my units start and I look at the victory conditions. How far away are they? Whether it's exiting or capturing some buildings or what have you. I count the number of hexes to get there. In an ideal situation, you assume it's all open ground and you assume you can just move every turn. That's so if I have to go 20 hexes and I can move maybe 5 hexes a turn in open ground, right? Moving four without a leader, moving four, advancing one, maybe five. That's what, 4 turns. So just running there, not firing anything, no one firing at me, just running 20 hexes across open ground would take me about 4 turns to get there. Then you start backtracking, or at least that's what I do. I start backtracking and look at, okay, I've got this many turns, but I'm moving through, you know, jungle or woods or grain or whatever, right? And I'm going to be being fired at. I'm probably going to be doing some firing. Then you try to work out some sort of calculus in your head saying I should be moving this many hexes on average per turn to get off the board or reach the victory condition hexes locations. But then you need to save time to actually capture those locations if that's what the victory conditions are. So it's very easy to get behind if you don't do this math up front to figure out how much you should be moving. And this mostly applies to bigger scenarios. Scenarios like, the guards counterattack or retaking Veerville, which I talked about earlier. You're not moving very far. But when we're talking campaign games or 3 boards or 2 boards, and you have to go across most of the board, and we're talking, 20, 30 hexes maybe, you should be doing this math up front to figure out, okay, I need to be progressing this much on average each turn. Because if I fall behind, there might be no way I can even reach to get to the locations to actually capture them or even get close to getting off the board. We've ended a lot of scenarios just because it wasn't feasible. It's like, yeah, we're on turn whatever, and there's no way I can get 5 squads off the edge of the board. It's just impossible. Even if I just ran through open ground, I couldn't get them off the board. So the scenario ends. So make sure you understand the scale, what you're playing, the terrain, the victory conditions, and number of turns you have to accomplish that. If you're the attacker, always be moving as the attacker. You should determine the average number of hexes, like I said earlier, to advance each turn based on the first bullet above. The saying, you've probably heard it, prep, fire, and die, as the saying goes. If you spend too much time, if you're on the attack and you need to be moving from point A to point B to achieve your victory conditions, if you're prep firing all the time, you're never going to get there. Sure, you may be breaking or eliminating enemy units, but he doesn't care. His whole job is to delay you. That's it. He doesn't care unless there's something in the victory conditions about number of units he can lose, right? As long as he slows you down, he doesn't care what you do, right? So if you're prep firing at him and you're not moving, he's probably like, should go for it. I'll just maybe break and route back a little bit and rally and slow you down some more. So always be moving, prep fire and die. Choose your prep fire very carefully. Then if you're on defense, always be breaking, as I like to say, as a defender. ASL, the original squad leader was a game about kill stacks, right? There was no, on the infantry fire table, there was no 1 KIA, 2 KIA, 3 KIA. There was just KIA. If you got a KIA and a hex with 3 full squads and a 10-3 leader, they were all dead, every one of them. That doesn't happen in ASL. It's very hard to get kills in ASL. ASL is more of a morale management game than anything. You lose units and you eliminate units primarily by morale attrition, right? You break a squad, you break them again, or you get them for failure to route. Excuse me. It's very rare that you get full KIA of a unit, and even if you do, it's more than likely just going to be 1 KIA. You're just going to kill one unit in a stack if it's someone is playing against an opponent who's stacking. The rest of the units might just break and they'll probably route back and rally again. So ASL is a game about morale management. So always be breaking units. Always keep units under DM. You can't really pin units, but a pinned unit is good because broken units, units under DM, disrupted units, pinned units, they're not moving, and therefore they're not always be moving if they're the attacker, and they're not moving towards the victory condition, location, or exiting off the board. So keep those units, enemy units, broken if you're on the defense, and keep them under DM at all costs. Even if you're just taking piddly pot shots just to keep them under DM, do it because if they're broken, they're not firing, they're not moving, they're essentially out of the game, and it's almost as good as a kill in squad leader because they're completely out of the game. Okay. I was going to show you a quick example of a scenario we played a while ago. Is this it? Yeah. This is, what was this? Oh, the drive for Tirzong. So it's Japanese versus Chinese, and I was the Japanese. I think we're on turn 3. We're in a little bit here, and you can see I haven't made much progress. I think I had to start or enter behind this line. I don't recall exactly, but I had to exit. What do I have to do? I had to exit 55 exit victory conditions off this edge, right? And I've got these trucks. They're armored, but they're trucks, so they're using 2-axle movement through open ground. And the reason there's no roads, right? There's only one road going through here, and he has some anti-tank guns, so I know he's covering and a roadblock, I believe. They're hidden here, so I know he's covering this. So I can't take my trucks down this road, right? So his trucks can move very well down road. Open ground, I think it's four movement points for open ground. Is it on here? Open ground. Yeah, yeah. Truck is 4 movement points. So what I had to do is think about because I knew I wasn't going to drive it down the road because he would just blast them if I tried to go through these woods, which is probably roadblocked anyway if you had a roadblock. So I had to take them kind of through these gaps, the trucks. So I had to sit down and go, okay, can I even make it going 4 movement points per hex, plus probably some changing cover arc, plus going up a hill, bypassing, I forget what it is to go over a wall. I don't even think trucks can even go over walls, right? And I was sitting here when we were playing, I was doing all the math and like, can I even do this? Right? In the number of turns I had, moving these stupid truck AFVs through open ground to exit off this side of the board. And I did the math and I figured out I could just barely do it if I did nothing, if I did no prep firing with them, if I only defensive fired with them, because they have coax machine guns and some crappy type of weaponry. So all I did was move them, and even then I had to move them through a gauntlet. Here's a 37L. I think the other one was over here somewhere. I'm just blowing by these guns, just hoping they make it by because I couldn't stop. If I didn't spend a turn moving, I would lose. So, and if I hadn't done that math up front and taken into consideration terrain, number of turns, and the victory conditions, if I wouldn't have done that up front, I would have easily lost. I ended up winning the scenario only because I did that math, that calculus up front to figure out if it was even achievable at this point in the game because I could not go down this road because I would have gotten blasted. My trucks would have gotten blasted. The trucks were a decent amount of victory points. My infantry just ran behind as best they could, and I was able to get 55 victory points off the board. Okay. That's it for METT-TC. Oops. I think that's the last slide. Yeah. Let's go back up to the top and review real quick. Here it is. Applying military doctrine to ASL. I went through all these 5 steps. Um, Most players, experienced players, have been doing this. They don't realize they're doing this. It's pretty common sense. That's why it's used as a military doctrine. New players, try to do your best to use these bullets when you get a scenario, when you get your mission and you're about to play. Um, Understand the mission, the victory conditions. Understand your enemy and their capabilities. Take advantage of that. Understand the terrain that you're going to be playing in, how to use it, how to take advantage of it, line of sight, hindrances, growing concealment, all of that. More importantly, understand your troops even better than your enemy troops, how they match up, and their nationality capabilities. And lastly, like I discovered, time. Don't run out of time. Time is the greatest creator of scenarios probably ever. You just run out of time, and the scenario's over before you even really get a chance to get your feet under yourself. So make sure you understand the scale of the game, time, or terrain, number of turns. Make sure you can accomplish your goal, and always be moving as a defender. Always be breaking. Okay, that's it for tactical tip number 9, applying military doctrine to ASL. I know it's a little long, but hopefully this is helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.